October 13th, 2011. A crew from a local animal rescue group heads behind a Homeland grocery store in Bethany, Oklahoma to set humane traps for feral cats. They find something else entirely. 2 bags, a small laundry bag and a Nike duffel, sitting in low-lying brush. The smell hits before anything else. When police arrive and open the bags, they discover body parts, individually cut and wrapped in plastic. The head and neck are in the smaller bag. Everything else is in the larger one. 4 days later, the remains are identified through tattoos and dental records. Her name is Carina Saunders. She's 19 years old. What followed was one of the most catastrophically botched investigations in Oklahoma history. Corrupt detectives, wrongful arrests, witnesses who lied and then recanted, a supposed murder video that no one can produce, and a rotating case of suspects that has never produced a single conviction. More than 14 years later, no one has been held accountable for what happened to Carina Saunders. The life and disappearance of Carina Saunders. Carina Brianne Saunders was born on July 17, 1992, and grew up in Mustang, Oklahoma, a quiet suburb just west of Oklahoma City. She was exceptionally talented, an honors choir singer, an athlete, and sharp enough to graduate early from Mustang High School in 2010. She talked about pursuing either music or accounting. People who knew her described her as warm and quick-witted, the kind of person who stood out in any room she walked into. But after graduation, something shifted. Carina moved out of her parents' house and began experimenting with drugs. Over the course of the next year, her life unraveled in the way these stories so often do. Quickly and then all at once. Summer 2011, a comeback that almost stuck. By the summer of 2011, Carina checked herself into Valley Hope, a rehabilitation facility. She seemed to be genuinely trying. She left the program early, though, and moved to Kanoa, Oklahoma, with a man she'd met in rehab. On September 18th, she made a surprise visit to her mother, Margie Queen. They went to church together. Margie later described the visit as hopeful. Carina seemed like she was coming back. Around this time, she was also asking a close friend to attend Narcotics Anonymous meetings with her. Then Carina went to stay with her cousin Catherine for about a week. On September 28th, she made what would be her final Facebook post. "What's everybody doing tonight?" That same day, she asked Catherine for a ride to meet up with a friend. They drove to a Taco Bell near Interstate 40 and Rockwell in Oklahoma City, where Carina got into a vehicle described as a mid-1990s blue or grey Chevrolet Blazer with 22-inch rims. The driver was later identified as Kenny Richards, a 44-year-old convicted felon with a history of drug offenses. Richards would later confirm to investigators that he picked Carina up that day. He said they hung out together and that he dropped her off at an apartment complex in Bethany. That was the last time Carina's family ever heard from her. The final sightings. Around October 6th or 7th, a friend from high school spotted Carina near a Bethany apartment complex. She looked rough. She told him she hadn't eaten in days. She had almost nothing with her, just a small bag. He gave her a green duffel bag he wasn't using anymore. Then, on October 8th, a Saturday, surveillance cameras outside the Newcastle Casino, roughly 20 miles south of Bethany, captured something critical. Carina is seen on CCTV getting into a red 4-door Ford pickup truck with a brush guard and lights mounted on top. A group of men appear to be inside. One man gets out briefly. He has full sleeve tattoos on both arms. Before Carina climbed into that truck, a group of girls in a nearby car was pleading with her not to go. OSBI Director Stan Florence later stated, "We don't know who those girls were." That footage is Carina Saunders' last confirmed sighting alive. October 9th, the text that shouldn't exist. The day after Carina's last sighting, Catherine received a text from a man named Kyle Savage. It read, "I'm going to bury you next to Carina." This is critical. At the time that message was sent, Carina had not yet been reported missing. Her body had not yet been found. Police did not yet know anything was wrong. When investigators later confronted Savage about how he could reference Carina's fate before anyone else knew, he claimed he'd felt threatened and was angry. When pressed on the specifics, why he phrased it the way he did, days before anyone found the body, he had no answer. Savage was never charged. October 10th to 13th, discovery. Carina's mother reported her missing on October 10th. 3 days later, the animal rescue crew found the bags behind Homeland. The autopsy revealed duct tape on Carina's thighs, indicating she had been bound before death. There were contusions on her right cheek and right shoulder. Perhaps most chillingly, rectangular cuts had been made around a tattoo on her upper back that read Queen Spade. The killer had tried to remove it, presumably to make identification harder. Her hands, feet, portions of her forearms, her left breast, and all of her clothing were never recovered. Before her death, Carina had consumed tramadol, though decomposition made it impossible to determine how much. Based on witness testimony, a caveat that will become very important, investigators estimated Carina's death occurred on October 11th at a house at 3500 South Harvey Street. That house was demolished on October 13th, the same day the body was found. That coincidence has never been adequately explained. The investigation. The case landed with the Bethany Police Department, a small municipal force that had never handled anything remotely like this. Under detectives Jack Jenks and Austin Warfield, they built their case almost entirely on witness testimony drawn from the same drug and sex work circles Carina had been moving through in her final weeks. It was an approach that would have consequences. Within months, the department was under intense public pressure to make an arrest. Oklahoma County DA David Prater would later say the department had submitted unsubstantiated paperwork in their rush to charge someone. Ruiz's own lawsuit put it more bluntly. Bethany PD had adopted a common goal of finding a viable target and ignored evidence of his innocence. Then came the internal collapse. Jenks was fired after evidence went missing from Bethany's property room. He was subsequently charged with 10 counts of larceny of a controlled dangerous substance. Warfield was also terminated. Both were reinstated after arbitration. Neither is currently with the department. In February 2013, roughly 16 months after the body was found, Prater dismissed all murder charges against Massey and Ruiz and transferred the investigation to the OSBI, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. The OSBI has been the lead agency ever since. They have executed dozens of search warrants, written hundreds of reports, and dug up multiple properties. No arrest has been made. By the time the OSBI took over, the crime scene at 3500 South Harvey, where witnesses had placed the murder, had been demolished on the same day the body was discovered. Key witnesses had been coached, threatened, or had retreated back into the drug world. The first 16 months had produced 2 wrongful arrests, a corruption scandal, and a trail gone cold. Theory 1. Human trafficking. Warning murder. This was the dominant theory from day one, and the one that drove the entire Bethany Police Department investigation. Court papers suggested Carina was killed to send a message, a warning to other girls being sexually trafficked not to resist. Carina's older sister, Carina Saunders, has been the most vocal advocate for this theory. Sarah later enrolled in a police academy certification program and founded a program to help trafficking victims through the non-profit No Boundaries International. In her words, they used her as an example to the other girls that if you don't let us traffic you, this is what we're going to do. Multiple women from the fringes of Oklahoma City's drug world came forward, claiming they'd witnessed Carina being dismembered alive by leaders of a trafficking ring, and that the killing was filmed to ensure compliance from other victims. It's a horrifying narrative. It also rests on a foundation of sand. Nearly all of the dramatic testimony came from people deeply embedded in drug circles. Their stories were internally inconsistent. Key witnesses recanted. The supposed murder video, which OSBI offered a $10,000 reward for, the maximum under state law, has never been produced, despite agents saying they had strong reason to believe it still exists. One specific account. A woman named Tia claimed that in May 2012, while hanging out with a friend named Luis at a Bel Air motel, she looked through his phone while he was in the bathroom and found a grainy video of Carina's murder. This led directly to the arrest of Luis Enrique Ruiz, a 37-year-old former elementary school teacher turned drug dealer, and Jimmy Lee Massey Jr., known as Big Country, a 33-year-old who had already been arrested on drug charges and had allegedly told a cellmate he was involved in the homicide and described the fact that they cut the girl's arms and legs off. Both men were charged with first-degree murder in July 2012. And then it all fell apart. Witnesses changed their stories. The testimony couldn't be corroborated by physical evidence. At one point, police found blood spatter, hair, and a machete in an apartment linked to the case. Forensic testing proved none of it matched Carina. Oklahoma County District Attorney David Prater dismissed the charges against both men in February 2013, citing unsubstantiated paperwork submitted by police in their rush to make arrests. Ruiz later sued Bethany, claiming the department was under such pressure to find a killer that they adopted a common goal of finding a viable target and ignored evidence of his innocence. The city settled for $50,000 in 2016. The trafficking theory isn't impossible, but the specific version of it that drove this investigation was built on unreliable witnesses and never supported by forensic evidence. Theory 2. Drug world retaliation. A related but distinct theory. Carina wasn't killed as a warning to trafficking victims, but because she personally owed money or crossed someone in Oklahoma City's drug underworld. Judy Roberts, a woman who told police she lived with Carina during the 2 weeks between her disappearance and the discovery of her body, said she herself feared for her life because she owed money to Mexican drug dealers. Roberts and her daughter gave investigators conflicting statements about Carina's whereabouts the night she disappeared. A witness reported that Roberts' housemate had seen Carina in shock and having trouble breathing in the days before her body was found. The problem is that the drug world retaliation theory has the same evidentiary weakness as the trafficking theory. It relies on witness statements from people with every reason to lie, deflect, or fabricate. And the sheer brutality and methodical nature of the killing, the plastic wrapping, the organized packing, the attempted tattoo removal, suggests something more personal and deliberate than a drug debt. Theory 3. Kyle Savage as perpetrator. Savage's text, "I'm going to bury you next to Carina," sent before anyone knew Carina was dead, is one of the most unsettling data points in this entire case. OSBI took him seriously enough to request his Facebook records twice, most recently in 2019, and obtained his phone records covering September through October 2011. But foreknowledge doesn't necessarily mean participation. Savage could have heard something through the same networks that ultimately fed unreliable information to police. His text could reflect knowledge acquired second-hand. Nothing in the public record directly ties him to the physical act of murder. He remains a person of interest, but the evidence doesn't build to a prosecutable case, or even a strong narrative one. Let's strip away the noise, the recanted testimony, the corrupt cops, the phantom snuff video, and look at what we can actually verify. Kenny Richards is the last confirmed person to have taken Carina from her family. He picked her up on September 28th and, by his own admission, drove off with her. From that point forward, Carina enters a world that Richards inhabits, a world of drugs, exploitation, and control. Search warrants show that Richards is a convicted felon, accused of making a nude video of Carina and of pimping her out in the weeks before her death. He was 44, she was 19, freshly out of rehab, and vulnerable. This isn't a peripheral figure. This is a man who was actively exploiting her. Then there's the photo. In November 2016, when Richards was arrested on methamphetamine charges, a search of his cell phone produced a photograph of Carina that investigators had never seen. The OSBI has never publicly described what that photograph depicted, which itself is telling. If it were innocuous, there would be no reason to withhold it. The discovery was significant enough to reignite official interest in Richards. In April 2017, OSBI agents spent 3 days excavating Richards' former property on Oakdale Drive, acting on a tip. They found a folding knife and women's clothing in an old septic tank. OSBI spokesperson Jessica Brown noted, "We know a knife or sharp-bladed instrument was used in her killing and dismemberment. Since we found a knife there at the scene, we are going to take it back to our laboratory to see if it has any relation to the marks on her body." The results of those tests have never been publicly released, which means either they were inconclusive or the OSBI is holding them as part of an active investigation. As we've seen, the timeline places Carina in Richards' orbit from September 28th through the early days of October. The friend who saw her around October 6th found her near a Bethany apartment complex, the same area where Richards said he dropped her off. She was starving. She had nothing. She was dependent on whoever was around her, and the person most consistently around her was Kenny Richards. Now consider the disposal of the body. The remains were found behind a Homeland grocery store in Bethany, Richards' territory. The methodical nature of the dismemberment, individual cuts, plastic wrapping, organized packing into bags, indicates someone who had time, privacy, and a degree of cold calculation. The attempted removal of Carina's Queen Spade tattoo tells us the killer knew who she was and wanted to delay identification. This wasn't a stranger crime. This was someone in her immediate circle. Apply Occam's razor. You have a convicted felon with a documented history of exploiting Carina. He's the last person confirmed to have taken her from her family. He had means, access to weapons, property, and privacy. He had motive. Carina was someone he was trafficking, and people being trafficked sometimes try to leave. He had opportunity. She was isolated, hungry, and dependent on him. He had an unexplained photograph of her on his phone 5 years later. A knife and women's clothing were found, buried on his property. By process of elimination, as we've discussed, the witness-driven theories about Massey and Ruiz collapsed entirely. Kyle Savage's text suggests foreknowledge but not necessarily participation. He may well have heard through the same networks. The unidentified man with sleeve tattoos in the red truck at Newcastle Casino on October 8th is a wild card, but that sighting doesn't exclude Richards. It could represent someone in his circle, or someone Carina was sent to by Richards. What most likely happened is this. Kenny Richards picked up Carina Saunders on September 28th and brought her into a world of exploitation. Over the next 10 days, he used her, controlled her, and kept her isolated and dependent. When she became a liability, whether she threatened to leave, to talk, or simply outlived her usefulness, Richards, likely with at least one accomplice, killed her. The dismemberment and disposal were deliberate, organized, and local to his area. The attempted tattoo removal shows awareness of forensic identification. The missing hands and feet suggest the same. Richards has never been charged with Carina's murder. He is currently serving a 6-year sentence for drug trafficking. The OSBI continues to investigate. The reason this case remains unsolved isn't that the evidence doesn't point somewhere. It's that the first investigation was so thoroughly corrupted by dirty cops, fabricated witness statements, and institutional pressure to close the case quickly, that the real trail went cold while detectives chased ghosts. By the time the OSBI took over in 2013, critical evidence was gone. The suspected crime scene at 3500 South Harvey was already gone. This is what happens when a small-town police department faces a crime beyond its capacity and responds with ambition instead of competence. Kyle Savage's text, "I'm going to bury you next to Carina," was sent before anyone reported her missing and before her body was found. Do you think Savage was directly involved, or was he simply plugged into a network where word traveled fast? I'd like to hear your take on that specific detail in the comments. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there.